I'm Lianne Hazell. I am working in many different capacities in the community of Red Deer, which means I wear many different hats and many different populations. And right now I am representing the Action Coalition on Human Trafficking in the province. I also work with the Alzheimer's Society and a variety of other areas. And I thought today we could talk about human trafficking. So in 2007, a group of social workers from the province got together, and I imagine that they got together at a social work conference and talked about their recognition that some of their clients are being human trafficked and what can they do about it, and then went out in the community to find people like police officers and other nonprofits who were providing services such as translation and emergency housing, and went and found people who were willing to talk about their trafficking experiences and said, what can we do? What do we need to do to help people who are being human trafficked, and what do we need to do to educate the public to know that this is happening in our communities provincially, and what do we do to solve the problem? So what do the partnerships look like in our community of Red Deer that are addressing human trafficking? Well, currently we have a group of people who sit around a table, and we are right now working on an emergency response plan for the city of Red Deer. So we have partners who come to the table with expertise such as translation services, legal services, housing services, and things like temporary foreign worker visas. So every person who has affiliation with a group who has an expertise that would be useful for a trafficking victim will come to the table and slot themselves into the emergency response plan where it would be appropriate. In the end, what we would like to have is a response plan for the city of Red Deer that talks specifically about what are the procedures that will happen when a person is identified as trafficked, regardless of what their entry point is. So the goal of the Action Coalition on Human Trafficking group in Red Deer is to build a plan to help people get out of trafficking who are already in trafficking. Now, the reason why we need to make it so that everyone who's involved can be a first entry point is very simple. If someone is being trafficked, for example, as a sex trade worker, that person is not going to walk into a community agency and say, help me, I'm the victim of human trafficking. However, that person may walk into a community agency and say, I've just been raped, please help me. And any community agency who's doing frontline work will welcome that person in and sit and talk to them, and they may have an inkling after a few minutes that there's some human trafficking issues, and they will pull out their emergency response plan and know exactly what the next call is to get some support and get this person on their way out of the trafficking situation. Okay, well, human trafficking in Alberta probably has existed for far longer than any of us realize. Most people do not understand that human trafficking is modern-day slavery. And in 2007, there were a few people who did realize human trafficking was happening in Alberta and formed a coalition called the Action Coalition on Human Trafficking. And as the name would indicate, the coalition is a group of people that come from a variety of sectors: police and non-government organizations, non-profits, social services, and victims of human trafficking themselves come together to talk about and plan for what can we do to support people who are being human trafficked, and for agencies who recognize they are working with people who are being human trafficked. So what is human trafficking, and specifically what is human trafficking in our community of Red Deer? Well, human trafficking, first of all, involves a specific route, and it would start with a method and a process and a goal. And what that means in terms of an example is the method might be transportation. So we have someone who answers an ad on the infamous Craigslist in Ottawa for a job that is available in Red Deer, and that's the transportation piece comes from the person who is hiring this fellow who lives in Ottawa, brings him to Red Deer, and the method is excuse me, and the method is the recruitment into whatever job he has been hired to do, and that's the goal, to bring him here to do the job. Now we have somebody from Ottawa who believes he is coming to Red Deer to be hired on as a laborer and will receive a wage and housing is provided. And when he gets here, he finds out that this is not indeed the case. He's come here and he will be trafficked, and it will probably be a bit of time, maybe a week or even up to a couple of months, before he realizes that he is being trafficked, because he'll come here and the first thing his trafficker will say to him is, "You owe me for the trip." And that seems reasonable. It seems reasonable to the person who's hired, so he starts working. And the more he works, the more he's being told that he's not being productive enough, so he still owes money for the transportation. He's not given a check. The housing that's been provided is substandard. It could be something like a small closet below a restaurant. So he's working in the restaurant all day, and at night he goes to a mat on the floor in the closet, and that's where he sleeps. And he comes here, and after 6 weeks, 2 months, he realizes he's not going to be an employee. He's not going to be paid. And what does he do at that point? He's pretty much held captive by the person who has hired him, so-called, to do the work. So something else we might see as an example of human trafficking in our community is if we go east and say we have a recruiter, and it could be, again, I don't have a problem saying the name Craigslist, because Craigslist has been in the news and is commonly used for human trafficking. So if a girl answers an ad for a massage therapist in Red Deer, and she is in St. John, Newfoundland, she would she would be hired, and then she would be given transportation to come to Red Deer. So when she comes to Red Deer, already she understands that she's going to have to pay back for the transportation. She is brought into what looks like, or could look like, a massage therapy studio. However, it probably more looks like a massage parlor. And very quickly she is physically abused, or she is given drugs to make her drug dependent, and she is turned out to clients as really a prostitute. Depending on who the trafficker is, they could be holding her forcibly, or they could be holding her on threats of such things that, like, if you try and escape, if you do not continue to work for us to pay off an imaginary debt that was created, we know where your family lives in St. John's. We will go there and we will harm them. We know that you have a 4-year-old child that you want to bring over to Red Deer. We will make sure that never happens and that your child never sees you. We will take movies of you doing things that will shame your family, and we will send it to your family. And typically what would happen after 2, 4, 6 weeks is the girl who has come from St. John's, is working in Red Deer, would now move on to Vancouver. So what does a trafficker look like? Well, I think we can safely say that a trafficker looks like you and me. And the reason we can say this is because people are easily drawn into the trafficker's circle. So they believe they are answering an ad from a legitimate employer. This person is not going to treat them badly in the beginning because they want to draw the victim in and make the victim trust them enough to go with them and begin a relationship with them that is employment and will become human trafficking. So what can we say about the personality of the trafficker? Well, I suppose the trafficker is someone who is, after they establish a relationship of trust with their victim, will become a controller and an abuser. So yes, human trafficking is a concern in our community, and people need to make themselves aware of that and need to get educated so that at least they know what human trafficking is, and it might lead to them being able to understand if someone's being trafficked. And I would say the first place to start is by checking out actalberta.org on the internet.